Voyage to the Planet of Prehistoric Women is an American sci-fi film released in 1968. Directed by Peter Bogdanovich at the behest of Roger Corman, it was adapted from an earlier Russian film that was released in 1962 titled Planeta Burr, which means Planet of Storms. That film was scripted by Alexander Kazantsev and based on his novel. Now this was actually the second adaptation of that film, the first being Voyage to the Prehistoric Planet from 1965. Both adaptations are essentially the original film, but edited with added scenes and dubbed in English over the original Russian scenes. According to Bogdanovich, Corman came to him with the original movie dubbed in English and asked him to add some scenes with women to spice it up. Bogdanovich went along with the request and figured out how to splice in some extra footage to the film. He added his own narration too to help the movie make sense. Because he only directed this added footage, he doesn't claim director credit for Voyage to the Planet of Prehistoric Women. The film begins with some kind of presentation about human space development and features a slew of models of various aircraft and other spacey things, some of which look more like vacuum cleaners. It's basically a foreword that says, hey, all this space travel technology is being worked on, and the following movie is a fantasy representation of what we could encounter in the future. It doesn't contribute to the story in any way, and the only purpose it seems to have is to establish that this movie is about space travel, which the title kinda does already. It transitions to the opening credits where we hear the high, shrill noise that permeates the entire movie. It's pretty annoying actually. Thankfully, we also hear the narrator for the first time. He starts off by talking about some woman which he encountered on Venus and is apparently responsible for the droning noise, which he seems to believe is sweet sounding. Something must be wrong with his ears. The narration is actually the director speaking and was included to help tie in the added movie footage. Keep in mind that every scene in this movie with women was added in this version, and without the narration it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Anyway, he goes on to tell his story which began in 1998. Ah, the future. So back in 1998, the first manned spaceship was launched toward Venus. Unfortunately, it was destroyed by a meteor. But wait! In just a mere 6 months, they launched Venus Trip 2.0. The mission is crewed by astronaut Sherman and Captain Kern with a sidekick robot named Robot John. Yep, Robot John.
Awaken, John. Awaken. Flow, John. Monitor, John.
On the way, they stop at Space Station Texas to gas up before heading out on the last leg of the voyage. The whole time they maintain contact with the command crew back on Earth, who listen intently. They're the ones who have to go out next if something screws up this mission, so naturally they are monitoring the sitch. This group is composed of Commander Lockhart, Astronaut Walters, and Astronaut Freneau, who is also the narrator. They receive word that the refueling is complete, and so the ship continues the voyage to Venus. Eventually they arrive and begin the landing cycle. It shows us an image of Venus that looks more like a boulder than a planet. They run into some difficulties but turn over control to Robot John, who attempts to guide them down. Something happens though and the command crew loses contact with the ship. Well, it's their turn now. Third time's the charm, I guess. Although I bet they're probably not too optimistic considering the first mission was a total loss, and the second one may be too. And now it's their ass in the hot seat. It jumps back to Venus and we learn that the crew actually survived, having crashed on the planet. Robot John, who looks more like a dude in a diving suit, is stumbling around in a tentacle swamp. It seems he lost an arm in the crash, lost his head too. But both the men survived, so that's good news. Maybe not for long though, as they are attacked by a bunch of lizard people. Or rather, a bunch of lizard people appear and the two astronauts shoot them all. So while Sherman massacres the natives, Kern finishes fixing up Robot John and sends him off to tether to a boulder to pull them up out of the tentacle swamp. While he's on the move, several lizard people gather around and rub up against him. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the third ship blasts off to complete the mission. As before, they also stop off at Texas for refueling. Guys? I forgot my safety tether. Guys? After their quick gas up, they head on out and eventually arrive, landing safely on the planet. Seems like third time was the charm after all. They do some visual reconnaissance to see what it looks like and don't see much besides some rock formations and fog, so they switch on their outside sound pickup, or microphone for anyone not in space. It mostly picks up a droning buzzing sound, but they also hear what sounds like a woman singing.
That was the first time I heard her.
A human being?
Hold it.
After an assessment of the atmosphere, they don their spacesuits and exit the ship to have a look around. From this point on, the droning sound is pretty much constant. It does make everything feel more space-like and mysterious, but mostly it's just annoying. Curious, Furneaux moves away from the ship to explore a bit. Hey, don't touch that. Ugh, just stop. Which he does, but then is attacked by a tentacle monster. Damn, I didn't know it was going to turn into that kind of movie. Kinky. He gets dragged away and almost violated, but luckily his crew moves quickly to save his space purity. After which the creature closes up, unfulfilled.
Can you imagine that? He's bashful.
Having escaped the tentacle sex, they hop in their space car and move out to investigate the estimated location of the other ship. On the way, they pass what appears to be a hairy dinosaur. At the same time, the other crew is trekking away from the crash site. You know, because that's what you should do if you're crashed on an alien planet. Move away from the spot where a rescue mission would be most likely to search for you. They're pretty worn out and are running out of oxygen, but they press on, eventually coming to a waterfall. Robot John walks right up to it and then complains that the water is affecting his systems. Well, then maybe you shouldn't have walked right up to it then. Kern tells him to do the obvious and get away from it, and then helps carry Sherman, who isn't doing so well. John finds a cave and they all head inside. At this point, Robot John just stands there repeatedly asking for orders while the two astronauts slowly suffocate to death.
You must help us. It's closing in.
I await your order. I await your order.
Rejoining our friends in the space car, they continue to cruise along on the search for their buddies. Out of nowhere, they hear the distant feminine calls that they heard earlier and stop to investigate. Here's where we see our first added footage of women, a bunch of Venusians laying around by the water. They never actually speak, but do so telepathically, which we can hear as the audience. The head Venusian, named Moana, wakes up her hippie girlfriends and they all get in the water to catch some dinner. Fish heads. Nom 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 nom. Ooh, new boob shells. Here, wanna trade? These aren't my size. The astronauts don't find anything, so they hop back in the space car and continue on. Out of nowhere appears a giant pterodactyl-like creature. It seems this creature is revered by the Venusian women as the god Terra. They sense that he's angry and decide to deuce out. Meanwhile, the search team is now cruising across the water trying to establish radio contact with the missing mission crew. They manage to raise Robot John on the horn and he gives them their coordinates. He also reports that Sherman and Kern aren't speaking or moving. Lockhart takes over and walks him through giving the men some pills, which we get to watch the robot try to administer awkwardly. What are you doing? The team moves out to their position but gets attacked by Terra. They ready the Astro gun and shoot him out of the sky. And for some reason they have to submerge underwater. The narrator says it's because the damage they sustained in the attack, but the only thing I saw get hit was the gun on top. Well anyway, they go underwater, I guess to hide and repair. While down there, they find a bronze statue with ruby eyes that strongly resembles the creature they just blasted out of the sky. They determined from this that there was once some kind of civilization on Venus, and that there still could be people here now. Furneaux goes off on his own again and finds an oddly-shaped rock. You'd think that he'd have learned his lesson by now, but no. And now he's even more vulnerable. I mean, he's underwater. And where do you usually find tentacles? Yeah. Don't worry though, nothing happens, but he does get spotted by a couple of Venusians swimming around nearby. So Terra washes up on the shore and is found by the Venusian women, which upsets them of course because their god is dead. They pick up the corpse and go off to carry it to a shrine. They pray while Moana puts on a hat. She then guides the procession out to the water where they set the corpse as a kind of burial at sea. The hat that she literally just put on is gone now. I guess it was just too windy for ritual headgear. A couple of other Venusian ladies swim up and inform Moana about the astronauts that they saw underwater. They think they're demons and correctly assume that they were responsible for killing Terra, proclaiming that the invaders must die. The astronauts manage to pull themselves up onto the shore and decide to make camp. Sitting around the fire, the men discuss what they found under the water and what else they think they might find on the planet. Furneaux is pretty anxious to meet whatever keeps making the singing sounds, convinced it is a woman. A space woman who might totally get down with him. and no tentacles either. After an undisclosed amount of time, having repaired and dried off the space car, they mount up and continue moving toward the other crew. You know, that space car is kinda cool. It hovers and can even do it over water. Plus, it can completely submerge and probably operate underwater too. Nifty. Meanwhile, rejoining the Venusians, they engage in some kind of ritual around a pile of rocks. Moana calls out to the god of the fire mountain to rain down fire and destroy the invaders. The Venusians pray so hard it causes the rocks to erupt in fire, which is a signal from the fire god that he has heard their pleas and causes a nearby volcano to erupt. Oh look! The stranded crew are back up and running again. Seems that Robot John wasn't so worthless after all and followed instructions correctly to save their lives. Seems like all they needed was to take a pill, although I'm not sure how that helps if they run out of oxygen. Observing the volcano, they comment on a light that appears to emanate from behind it, and that it looks like it could be from a city. They don't linger too long though as the lava is creeping closer. Sherman wants to take samples, but Kern thinks they should deuce. He agrees to stay, but it ends up screwing them as their way is now blocked. In order to escape, they climb on Robot John and he begins to carry them across the lava flow. Everything seems to be going well enough, and they receive word that the rescue team is only about 2 miles out. Robot John suddenly stops though and states that his self-preservation mechanism is telling him to shed the extra weight so he can get out of there. The astronauts attempt to remove the mechanism so John doesn't toss them in the lava, and he gingerly caresses Kern's leg in defiance. Before he can throw them off though, he burns out and dies, frozen in place while the 2 astronauts hang on, suspended over the lava. Luckily, their buddies arrive in the space car. 2 of them hop out and Lockhart continues on to find the stranded men. He swings by and picks them up, then heads back to the others for a brief reunion. Robot John is left out in the lava where he falls over and is consumed. The group heads out but stops on a beach to regroup and take stock of the situation. They're low on provisions and have low fuel in the ship, now also having 2 more men adding extra weight. Sitting and chillaxing a bit, they share the evidence that they had previously found of a prior civilization on the planet. Kern isn't convinced it's possible, but Lockhart knows what they saw. He also makes a joke about the lizard people that Kern and Sherman massacred earlier, that they could have been natives dressed up as lizard people to try and scare them away.
What possible story could explain it better, huh?
Walters pulls a fast one on Furneaux and makes him think the tentacle monster is back for his purity. They're in pretty good spirits for some people who aren't sure if they'll make it off the planet alive. The movie then jumps back to the Venusian women who are all sleeping out by the water again. Moana wakes them up and notices something nearby. It's Robot John, covered in fresh rock and washed down by the water. She knows it belongs to the demons and believes it is an offering from the god of the fire mountain, showing his power. Now that they've finished regrouping, the astronauts head back to the ship. Moana sees them pull up to their ship and decides that since they're still alive, they must be more powerful than the god of the fire mountain. The Venusians go back to the shrine and pray to Terra to destroy the men with water and wind, which triggers a great storm. The rain creates huge floods and the ground starts to crack open, threatening the ship. The crew frantically offload as much as they can to lighten the load and start to mount up to blast off. Furneaux is messing with some kind of equipment and he uses the rock he found as a hammer. Afterwards, he notices that it's cracked and is able to pull off the outer layers of rock, revealing a carved face. A face that curiously looks like a woman wearing a funny hat. He flips out with excitement and heads to the ship, crying out that they can't leave. Despite this, they pull his loony ass in the rocket and blast off before the ship can be consumed in the storm. The Venusians watch as the ship leaves and Moana determines that they must be more powerful than even Terra, otherwise how could they escape? This pisses them off and they turn on their former god, destroying the shrine to Terra. In his place, they raise up the charred remains of Robot John, who they believe represents a stronger god. Moana puts on her alien chef hat and they all shrill praises to their new god. Since this is added footage, you can tell this isn't the original robot. Not unless lava makes robots get dummy thick. Then the movie ends with the narrator finishing his story, meandering about whether or not he'll ever get to clap them sweet Venusian alien cheeks. So there you have it, that's Voyage to the Planet of Prehistoric Women, a Russian sci-fi film dubbed in English and cut with added scenes of clamshell brassiered blondes. I gotta say, I don't think those added scenes really did much for the movie. It's pretty obvious that they don't belong, and this is shown by the fact that the men never actually see these women. They do hear them, and apparently the Venusians do see the men at a few points, but there's no interaction between any of them. Additionally, anytime you hear the narrator, it is pretty much overriding the actual dialogue to help make the added scenes make sense. I do think it helps too, since they changed some elements of the original story to be able to insert the added scenes. I'm sure it's a difficult task to splice in some half-naked ladies into an already finished film while simultaneously trying to add justification for why they have to be there in the first place. Plus, this was the second adaptation of the film. They probably needed to do something different to distinguish itself from the first one, although I'm sure part of it was just to slap some skin on it to make some money. In the original film, all 3 spaceships were traveling to Venus together. One of them gets destroyed by a meteor, and the remaining crew decide to continue the mission despite this. They do get separated on the planet after their attempts to land, and most of the story throughout the rest of the film is pretty much the same as the original. The main difference being the presence of the Venusian women and their constant indecisiveness when it comes to which god to venerate. While the original film does feature the feminine singing, the only time a woman is shown on the planet is at the very end where we see her reflection in a pool of water after the crew leaves. Terra also isn't a god in the original film, but rather just one of the large creatures that the men encounter, so really this adaptation is still pretty close to the source for the most part. They still go to the planet, encounter alien creatures, find evidence of a past civilization, and then get the hell out before the ship is destroyed. So overall, not too bad really. I enjoyed watching it, but that droning buzzing sound that's always in the background gets old real quick. I enjoyed learning about the film, having no prior knowledge of this movie when I picked it. It was a nice treat to find out that it was actually the second adaptation of an earlier made Russian flick. Pretty neat. So if you're feeling squirrely and want to check out a campy old sci-fi film where no one is sexed by a tentacle monster, disappointingly enough, then go ahead and check out Voyage to the Planet of Prehistoric Women.